Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. Kicking off a new week here, we're also going to start a new theme, this one being album openers, looking at tracks that start off an album. Today we're going to start with the track called
Les jardins de minuit
from Alcest, which translates to Midnight Gardens. So, let's dive into this. This comes off of their Spiritual Instinct album and see what Alcest is bringing to the table today. Ooh. Not where I thought that was going. Quite a bit under what I was expecting. Yeah, we get no resolution on that cycle. Okay, I see what they're doing now. Okay. A lot of crash work. Not what I was expecting for some reason. A very punky riff compared to the black metal start we had. So a less wide version. Yeah, that alternating accent pattern. Yeah, so our first accent is on a downbeat, our second one is on an offbeat, our last one is on another downbeat. I kind of like the reverb on the guitars. There's a lot of width to them that Kind of works for the atmosphere. Ooh, a little key change here. Okay. Interesting ride cymbal pattern. Interesting to push towards the side of simplicity for this final bit here. And we're going to finish the track on our intro. Okay. Different drum pattern though. Alternating bass and snare with the ride rather than the crash is which is what we did the first time through this section. Oh man. Okay. I'm gonna have that little lick stuck in my head. Digga 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 digga. I'm just gonna have that stuck in my head all day. It is oddly catchy. Especially in its more complex element. Because, like, there in the bridge, we were just riding a pedal tone for, like 10 seconds. And then we would have this little 2-second lick. And then we'd go back to the pedal tone. There, I don't think it was as infectious, but the way it was utilized in the more complex areas. Yeah, because it had a chord progression going into it. That's what it was, rather than the pedal tone. Yeah, actually, that's an interesting word for this because we do have a song that, at least on paper, is a mix of thrash and punk, usually dancing between the two sides more so than trying to fuse them. And yeah, we've had plenty of conversations like punk and black metal have they're closely branched on the tree of metal. I don't quite remember exactly their relationship, but they're not too distant. So, hearing punk drumming ideas, especially in black metal style music, is not uncommon. But yeah, they definitely have both styles in here, separated very heavily. I think there's well, let's get into it. Let's make this the first topic. We'll have timestamp number one here. The thrash and the black metal. Nope, the thrash and the punk. I can't even name this stuff right. So, these are actually separated on multiple axes, where we have a separation between the punkier ideas and the thrashier black metal ideas, and we also have a separation between the rhythmic ideas and the melodic ideas. And the only reason I did it like this is so that we could create a nice graph with 4 quadrants. Because this song is interesting in that if you look at the guitars, you're never going to hear a section that feels both punky and thrashy. And if you listen to what the drums are doing, you're never really going to hear a rhythm that is punky and thrashy at the same time. But you might have a thrashy drum idea on top of punky guitars or thrashy guitars. And so when I say that we separate the two ideas, it's not that we don't hear them simultaneously, but we hear them simultaneously across the two different elements of pitch writing and rhythm writing. Um, and it creates a fascinating component to the composition here, in which case they can write just a handful of ideas for either sets of composition, the pitched or the rhythmic, and combine them in any way that they want further down the road to create unique elements, even though they've only written a handful of ideas. And it keeps the song feeling fresh even when we have callbacks. And I really like that. Like, even there at the end, well, just compare the intro to the outro. Um, well, the outro to our first metal section, because we do start with something that is very not metal. But once the electric guitars come in, I want to compare that to what the outro does. The guitars are doing the exact same thing. We have 16th note picking across a series of notes, usually giving 4 hits per note. So we're only changing notes every beat, but we're getting 4 attacks per beat. Makes it sound fast, but also slow. Melodically, we're not moving. Rhythmically, we are. There's another divide between the rhythm and the melody, but that's also kind of intrinsic to a lot of black metal. We hear that a lot, where you just kind of stay on a single note for a while. I've said this before, if we remove all the attacks, we actually have some music that is slow moving. You're just kind of holding these notes out for a long time. What makes it black metal or thrash in some cases is the frequency of which we attack. Every note is broken up into smaller, shorter attacks, shorter notes of that pitch, but played multiple times. Anyways, moving on. The drums, though, here were not as frantic as where we were at the end. We finished it with a very generic black metal idea of alternating bass and snare in 16th note patterns with a 16th note ride cymbal on top of it. We began it with still rigid drumming, but not alternating snare and bass on 16th notes, and with heavy use of the crash cymbal rather than the ride. And there's a real big difference here in that the ride is a very narrow sound. It has a nice reverb to it, like most cymbals do, but it's a narrow sound. It's a controlled sound. It's ting 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 to ting to ting to ting. Whereas the crash cymbal, as it implies, has a very wide sound. It's that and you have that nice big tail on it. So they can't be utilized interchangeably. They have their own strengths and weaknesses. So we hear that too. In our first metal section, the crash is used sparingly because 1 hit fills up a lot of beats. Where at the end, it is used on every 4 times, either 2 to 4 times a beat. I said it was 16th notes, but I'm kind of second guessing myself now and thinking maybe it was eighth. Um, Anyways, it was played frequently, very different from our crash cymbal. And we can just hear this divide here, where the guitars are both doing something thrashy or black metal in both sections, but the drum work is different in both of them. And that's one of the ideas where we can call back something we've already heard, but pair it with something different on the other end of the spectrum compositionally and end up with a brand new, unique section of stuff we've already written before. And we hear a ton of that in here. It's so good compositionally. Um, and it's really fun to do. I highly suggest doing this at least once if you're a composer, even if you've never composed anything and you're curious. This is a really neat way to go about doing things. Before you start writing your music, write a few riffs, write a few drum patterns. And then instead of trying to figure out what should go with this section, what should go with that section, what kind of drum beat fits under here, just say that drum beat and this riff I wrote, put them together. That drum beat and this riff I wrote, put them together. Oh, I like that first riff, but let's try it with a different drum beat and put that together. And just build your song using these pre-made. You pre-made them, but they're still kind of pre-made. They were made before your compositional, before you started building your song, and just using that as like building blocks to build your track out. The Your first time's gonna be a bit rough, right? Because you still have to have a cohesive concept of what's generally going to work well here. Um, but once you get used to it, you become like Alcest, where you can literally grab any drum beat from the track and any guitar riff from the track and make a new section that still sounds good together. Um, it's a really fun exercise to do, and I like to use it when I kind of hit a roadblock, hit that like writer's block. Maybe I can't put a whole song together, but I have a riff in my head, right? And I have some drum patterns, and maybe it'll take me a day or two to build up my collection of pre-made ideas, and then I can just see where that takes me and, tweak it as I go, right? It doesn't have to be only building blocks. Um, the next thing I want to talk about that I thought was really cool was, which one do we do first? Key or timbre? Or like emotion's gonna be like the. All right, so I think it's just gonna be like all three of these combined. Maybe I'll find good points to smoothly transition between ideas. We'll start with timbre. This is mostly a production thing, although not so much for the vocals, but for the guitars it is a production thing. For the drums it's a production thing. A lot of this feels like black metal to me musically, and there is a black metal element in that obfuscation of the music as far as production goes. Where we're kind of covering things up with that fuzz and the distortion, but it's not as gritty as some other black metal. It's kind of clear in a lot of places. And I had mentioned, a couple of these areas where I'd mentioned at one point, I can't remember, chorus maybe? Or like a chorusy type section. I was like, the guitars have a ton of reverb on them, and they're kind of wide, and it kind of muddies things up, especially when you have so many attacks and each of them are getting their own reverb. It creates this constant rippling in the water kind of idea. But the rippling is the texture, it is the atmosphere of the whole thing, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to see the picture clearly, but it does a fantastic job at building that atmosphere. And I said it kind of works there. It's not particularly the production I would like to hear when listening critically. It doesn't make it easy to figure out what's going on, but it absolutely works at building a very specific atmosphere that they do very well. Um, the harsh vocals I felt were a bit too compressed. This is mostly going to be a perceived volume thing, which is something we've talked about on the channel a couple of times. The vocals, a lot of them are just very um, calm, comfortable range, comfortable volume. And then the growling you would expect to be louder based on the sound, the width of the the vocals themselves, and they're not. In some cases, they're even quieter. when we have both vocals going on at the same time. And this is 100% a production thing, right? You want to make sure your quieter vocals can be heard with the growling next to them, but it also sounds backwards to my ears. It's an odd concept. It's the reason why metal sounds, the reason why we like metal to be loud. Distortion is clipping. It's having the volume too high. Metal doesn't sound good quiet because we expect these sounds to be loud. And so the growls end up feeling a bit undercooked to me. They feel a bit too low in the EQ. They're lacking punch. But it's because the rest of the track has a bit of clarity that it doesn't. It has more of a black metal production on it. And it feels a bit out of place to me on a first listen. It's something I would definitely get used to over time. And I'm not going to say it's a bad choice, but it was a little distracting for a first listen of the track. The guitar tones, other than just that really wide sound, they also have a lot of high end in the EQ, which is not odd for black metal. I'm trying to like black metal because it's highly compressed tends to lose a lot of low end anyways. But I think it's because it's paired with, let's segue into the key. It's paired with very bright sounds, the melodies, the note relationships, the intervals between our notes, the chords that are being utilized. There's a lot of brightness in the song, both in coloring of the instruments and coloring of the chords themselves. It feels, well, primarily because a lot of the black metal I've listened to kind of revolves around despair or depression or satanic elements. It's hopeful. I don't know what our lyrics are going to be. Midnight Garden could mean a lot of things. I picture actually a very beautiful place, starlit atmosphere, maybe like a soothing sound of a river. To me, a midnight garden is a very cool thing. Um, it does not have to be. The concept of being near wilderness at night can definitely be taken in a very different direction than where I would go with it. But sonically, there's very little darkness in here. There's a lot of elements of the music feeling bright and happy and hopeful and just not black metal. It's actually really interesting to hear the tremolo picking, the aggressive drumming, the blast beats, the growling with something so optimistic. But I think I can get behind it. And a lot of it comes down to where I was going with this is the key. We do have a couple of what I believe are going to be accidentals in our opening idea. It was one of the two opening concepts, and I think we also had this leading into the bridge, where we just had these really dark notes. Everything was kind of neutral or positive, and then they hit this one note, and both times they lean into it and they hold it out, and you're just like, ooh, that's dark, that's gritty, it's got bite. And it just kind of comes out of nowhere and lingers for a little bit. And even after we've passed the note, you can still feel that darkness surrounding the song. It's an interesting choice to have, to go against the grain of what black metal typically sounds like as far as chords and intervals go, and then still incorporate a little bit of that darkness that the genre is known for. I'm really stoked to get into the lyrics to see what kind of themes they're exploring there. I'm kind of thinking we're going to have a subversion where the song's kind of brighter and the lyrics kind of darker, but we'll see. And this kind of takes us into atmosphere, emotion, what all of this lends itself into. And I have a song here that feels, it's got a duality in it, right? We have the separation of the punk and the black metal. We have the separation of the rhythm and the melody. We have a separation of the bright with a little bit of the darkness here and there. We have Even the vocals, which I didn't really touch on much outside of the production on them, but there are multiple places where we have two vocalists. In fact, our very first vocal section had two vocalists doing counterpoint. They had completely different lines, completely different lyrics, completely different melodies. Eventually, when we did bring them together for a unified part, we had growls and cleans. There's always a division there. And that's what a lot of this song to me is. It's divisive. It's finding the point between two places, and I don't know. It's like magnets of similar poles. I don't know why I'm second guessing that right now, but you can get them close together, but you can't ever really get them to touch. There's always going to be forces pushing them away, and that's what the song feels like to me. I wouldn't say that any of these sections are divorced from each other. All of these ideas work well in tandem with their opposing concepts, but none of them, it's like oil and water. They're together, but they're not. One's always going to be on top of the other. There's not going to be much space between them, but there's a division. And I'm really curious how they're going to take all this and wrap it into the idea of a midnight garden. So I'm going to hit that and then we'll wrap this up. Okay, so this is well, I think possibly more optimistic than I was expecting. Like I'd mentioned, I kind of figured there's going to be a subversion, a lot of black metal, even metal in general, if they go to do this. Like, man, I wish I could remember the specific example. It was music that was traditionally aggressive, that had been given, it might have been black metal again, that had been given this brighter tonality to it and brighter musicality. And then the lyrics were still just as dark as the genre typically has. I don't remember what that is, but that's what I thought was going on here. Anyways, so it speaks of a path. It fades away. It's at the edge of the silver cypresses, and our narrator is going to find this path and walk it by following the sirens and the stars. When they get there, it says my non-human plots or non-human parcels, two different translations there, merges with the heart of the blue water that slumbers in the midnight gardens, where time stands still. So they're in a mythical place, maybe even a mystical place. Definitely something a bit beyond the reality we tend to accept. Says, the spiritual instinct, can you give me strength? And daydreams, can you give me courage to fully welcome light as well as shadow? There is a little bit of darkness in this. The end of the track simply states, in the midnight gardens, trees soar to collected moons. In the midnight gardens, giants rise in the whipping winds, in the ripping wind at night. So they use the siren song and the stars to find this place that most people can't find. It's on the very edge of, they say the edge of silver cypresses. I kind of take this to be like just the edge of perception. You have to be slightly more attuned with the spiritual part of the world to see it, to find your way there. And when there, they introduced something. I don't know what it is, the non human parcels. Um, to mingle with the blue water, and they ask for strength and courage to embrace both light and shadow. And in this ritual that happens, the trees rise and grow. It starts out very straightforward. It says the trees soar towards the moon, even though soar is metaphorically. And then we get to see a analogy for the trees called giants rise in the wind. And that's it. It seems to just be about some sort of uh, druid ritual, uh, which is neat in and of itself. And there's a little bit of growth of self through an understanding and uh, helping, caring of nature. I help nature grow, and hopefully, I get a little courage out of that, a little bit of strength. I help the world helps me kind of vibe. I don't, aside from the idea of welcoming light and shadow and working within both of them, I don't really see much of the music that fits in here. I picked up on a lot of duality in the music, none of that's really here. The lyrics are very soothing, much like the clean vocals that we had. Not like the blast beats, not like all the 16th note, well, I suppose the 16th note strumming, not the drumming. The 16th note drumming to me is a bit more aggressive, but I think the strumming of the guitars at such a speed can certainly create a sort of trance-like idea. I've heard people talk about that in the comments, especially when it comes to black metal, is that the thrashier, faster black metal stuff is really calming and soothing to them, and maybe that's what they were going for here. To me, this is a disconnect. I'm gonna chalk that up to a personal thing, though. I would much rather have gentler music with this, possibly a string quartet instead, um, with I don't know, a bassoon. Yeah, that would be good. And a flute, bassoon, and a string trio. We'll go with a string trio. We'll do a violin, viola, and cello, and bassoon and flute. Yeah, and create something very soothing and warm. Really bring that darkness out in the cello and the bassoon, but still have the lightness in our flute. Yeah, and very chill. That's the kind of music I would expect with these lyrics. The fast black metal playing is and the growling, they seem at odds to me. But again, like I said, I'll chalk it up to a bias. Um, and hopefully y'all can shed some light on that in the comments. If you have your own perspective on this, if you find it soothing, if you think the lyrics and the music line up very well, let me know. Put that stuff down in the comment section. These are my thoughts on what is this track called? Alcest's oh yeah, Midnight Garden. I'm not gonna try to pronounce that. I tried before starting this video. I honestly tried a couple of times and I was like, my tongue is not up for the task on this one. We'll have to use Google Translate's voice for it. But I can say Midnight Garden. That's very simple for me. I already mentioned the comment section. In the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you to this menu. You can find ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord. You can find my music, and so much more. I put a ton of stuff in there. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. Alright, we have a special selection today as well. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC. As usual, we'll continue on with this week's theme. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.